Hello, ladies and gentlemen. When you're about to give up, that's precisely when you must not. That's the moment where everything that matters, your character, your future, your potential, is on the line. And it's in those moments, the dark, the painful, the seemingly unbearable moments, that you must decide who you are. Because if you give in, if you let the weight of suffering drag you down, then you are training yourself to break under pressure. And if you do that enough, you will never stand up again. Life is suffering. That is an inescapable reality. You will be betrayed. You will fail. You will experience loss. And you might reach a point where you think, why bother? That's the temptation. That's the voice whispering, wouldn't it be easier to quit? And you know something? It would be easier. It would be far easier. But easier doesn't mean better. Easier doesn't mean right. You don't get stronger by avoiding difficulty. You don't build resilience by surrendering. You build strength by standing where you are, by facing the uncertainty and the pain, by deciding that no matter how unbearable this moment feels, it will not define you. You must act as if your actions matter, because they do. You must push forward even when there's no guarantee of success, because the alternative is worse. Because if you stop, if you let yourself crumble, then you are allowing despair to win. There is something inside you that is capable of enduring more than you believe. There is something in you that is built for struggle. That's what people are. We are creatures that climb uphill, that fight through the storm, that refuse to kneel to chaos. You can fall. Of course you can. Everyone does. But there is no virtue in staying down. There is nothing noble in surrendering to misery. Stand up. Face what is in front of you. Carry your burden properly. Speak the truth. Take responsibility for what is yours to bear. And in doing so, you will discover that what seemed impossible was merely the next necessary step. The part of you that wanted to quit will die, and in its place, something stronger will emerge. Because you are not weak, you are not defeated, not yet. Life is suffering. That much is undeniable. There will be moments when you feel abandoned, broken, and exhausted beyond belief. You will struggle. And at times, it will seem as though no one sees it, no one cares, and no one will come to your aid. But that's not true. There is something watching, something beyond you, beyond your comprehension, something that knows your pain in ways even you cannot articulate. God sees your struggle, and that matters. Think about what that means. You are not just another insignificant being lost in the chaos of existence. The suffering you endure is not meaningless. It is seen. It is accounted for. It is part of something much greater than you can perceive. When you feel like the weight of life is unbearable, like you are screaming into the void and no one is listening, you must remember there is a presence, an order behind the chaos, an intelligence so vast that it can weave even your suffering into something meaningful. It is an unbearable thought to live in a world where suffering is arbitrary, where pain is random, and where no justice exists. That is what true despair looks like, but that is not the world we live in. There is a moral structure to reality. There is a judge beyond the limitations of human perception, and he sees not only what you endure, but also how you endure it. This means something crucial: your suffering is not invisible, and it is not purposeless. When you struggle, you are not just experiencing pain for no reason. You are being tested. You are being forged into something stronger. Every great figure in history, every biblical hero, every person who has risen above misery has done so through struggle. And every one of them at some point has felt abandoned, lost, and overwhelmed. But they were not, because God saw them just as He sees you. But knowing that God sees your struggle is not just a comforting thought, it is a responsibility. If your pain is known, if your suffering is witnessed, then it matters how you face it. You can either become resentful, bitter, and broken, or you can stand up, face the burden, and bear it with faith. You can shake your fist at God and demand an explanation, or you can trust that there is an order to this chaos that you cannot yet comprehend. You might ask, if God sees my suffering, why doesn't He remove it? But that's the wrong question. A better question is, what is God trying to show me through this? Because suffering is not just something to be eliminated, it is something to be endured and learned from. It is a teacher. It reveals the depths of your character. It forces you to confront what you are truly made of. And if you endure it properly, it transforms you into something far greater than you were before. You do not suffer alone. No matter how isolated you feel, you are seen. Your struggles are accounted for. And if you bear them with faith, with courage, and with the belief that they are leading you somewhere meaningful, then they will. Because God is not indifferent. He does not ignore pain. He allows suffering, yes, but he does so because it is through suffering that we grow. It is through struggle that we come to know him more deeply. So when you feel like giving up, when the weight of your burden seems impossible to carry, remember God sees your struggle. And if he sees it, it is not for nothing. It is an invitation to trust, to grow, to become something stronger than you ever imagined. Stand up under the weight of your suffering because he is watching. And if you do, you will find that he has given you the strength to bear it all along. Life is structured in such a way that it demands sacrifice, endurance, and faith. No one escapes suffering. You will experience loss, betrayal, failure, moments that shake the very foundation of your being. These moments, the ones where everything feels like it is crumbling around you, are not just obstacles, they are tests. They are a trial by fire, a crucible in which your faith, your belief in God, and meaning in the ultimate order of the universe is either solidified or shattered. And how you respond in those moments determines the trajectory of your entire life. You see, faith is not real until it is tested. It's easy to say you believe in God when everything is going well. It's easy to be virtuous when there is no cost. But what happens when you are stripped of security, when pain is overwhelming, when the future is uncertain? That's when real faith begins or ends. Because faith is not just about intellectual agreement with an idea, it is about trust. It is about acting as if what you believe is true, even when every external sign tells you otherwise. Look at the greatest figures in Scripture: Abraham, Moses, Job, even Christ himself. Every one of them faced a moment, or many moments, where they had every reason to abandon faith. Abraham was told to sacrifice his son. Moses wandered the desert for 40 years, questioning his own ability to lead. Job lost everything: his wealth, his health, his family, and yet he still refused to curse God. And Christ, he faced the ultimate test, the cross, crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And yet he still fulfilled his purpose. What do these stories tell us? They tell us that faith is not about comfort. It is not about receiving blessings in exchange for obedience. It is about trusting that there is an order beyond your comprehension, even when everything around you suggests chaos. It is about believing that suffering has meaning, that trials are not random punishments but necessary tests. And why must faith be tested? Because untested faith is weak. It crumbles at the first sign of difficulty. If you have never been challenged, never been pushed to your limits, then you don't really know what you believe. You don't know if you can stand firm. You might think you can, but thinking and knowing are not the same thing. So when suffering comes, when trials appear, you have a choice. You can let them break you. You can allow resentment, doubt, and fear to take over, convincing yourself that God has abandoned you, that nothing matters, that you are alone. That is the easy path, and many take it. But there is another path, the path of endurance, of steadfastness, of holding on to faith even when it seems impossible. And those who take that path, those who withstand the test, emerge transformed. They are not the same people they were before. They are stronger, wiser, and more deeply connected to the divine. Trials are not meant to destroy you. They are meant to refine you, to strip away the weak, fragile parts of yourself and reveal what is truly solid. So when you are tested, when you feel abandoned and broken, ask yourself, will I let this trial shatter my faith, or will I let it prove that my faith is real? Because in the end, those who endure, those who remain faithful, even in the fire, are the ones who truly understand what it means to trust in God. Life is exhausting. There are moments when the burden becomes too heavy, when you feel like no matter how hard you push, you're getting nowhere. You wake up with the same worries, the same fears, the same overwhelming sense that you are too small to handle what life is demanding of you. And that thought, it's dangerous. It tempts you toward despair, toward giving up, toward becoming resentful, bitter, even nihilistic. But that is not the right path. That is not where you should go when you are weary. Because the truth, whether you realize it in the moment or not, is that you are not meant to carry everything alone. And you are not expected to. God gives strength to the weary. That is not just a poetic sentiment, it is a reality, but only if you are willing to receive it. Think about this carefully. Strength is not something that comes from comfort or ease. Strength is forged in difficulty, in resistance, in suffering. And yet there are times when the weight is too much for a person to bear alone. That is why faith matters. That is why trust in something beyond yourself is necessary. Because if you rely only on your own strength, you will eventually collapse under the weight of life. No one is strong enough on their own. No one is invincible. Look at history, at scripture, at the stories that have endured for thousands of years. Again and again, we see individuals at the end of their strength. Moses, overwhelmed with leading his people, begged for relief. Elijah, pursued and hunted, collapsed in exhaustion and asked God to take his life. Even Christ, in his most human moment, prayed in the Garden of Gethsemane, sweating blood under the pressure of what was to come. And yet, in every case, God did not remove the burden entirely. He strengthened them to carry it. That is the key. God does not always take away your suffering, but he gives you the strength to endure it. And that strength is not just physical, it is mental, emotional, and spiritual. It is the kind of strength that allows you to stand when you feel like collapsing. The kind that keeps you moving when your mind tells you to quit. The kind that transforms weakness into resilience. But you have to ask for it. You have to be willing to surrender your pride, to admit that you cannot do it alone, and to turn to God in humility. That is not weakness. That is wisdom. Because the alternative is to grind yourself into dust, to become so consumed by your own exhaustion that you collapse entirely. That is not noble. That is not necessary. So when you are weary, when the weight of life feels unbearable, do not fall into despair. Do not give in to bitterness. Lift your eyes, ask for strength, and then stand up, because you are not alone. Because God sees you, and because he will give you what you need to carry on. So when you are weary, when the weight of life feels unbearable, do not fall into despair. Do not give in to bitterness. Lift your eyes, ask for strength, and then stand up. Because you are not alone. Because God sees you, and because he will give you what you need to carry on. Pain is inevitable. There is no escaping it. It will come in many forms: loss, betrayal, failure, loneliness, regret. And when it does, you will be faced with a choice. You can see it as meaningless suffering, as a cruel joke played by an indifferent universe, or you can recognize that pain has a purpose. Because it does, and if you fail to understand that, you will become bitter, resentful, and broken. Think about it this way. If pain had no purpose, then what would that mean? It would mean that suffering is arbitrary, that nothing is guiding it, that it serves no higher function. And if that were true, then existence itself would be a cruel absurdity. But that is not how reality works. Pain transforms, pain refines. It strips away the unnecessary, the weak, the naive illusions that keep you stagnant. Pain forces you to grow. Consider the great figures of history, the people who have endured tremendous suffering and emerged stronger. The prophets, the leaders, the revolutionaries, none of them were spared hardship. If anything, they suffered more than most. And yet, their suffering gave them wisdom, resilience, and a depth of character that comfort never could. Look at Job, a man who lost everything: his wealth, his health, his family, and still did not curse God. Look at Christ, who endured suffering beyond comprehension, not because it was meaningless, but because it was necessary. You do not become strong by avoiding pain. You become strong by facing it, by enduring it, by understanding that it is shaping you into something more. Every time you suffer, you are being presented with an opportunity to learn, to become wiser, to develop a kind of strength that cannot be obtained any other way. But if you refuse to see that, if you allow your pain to make you resentful, then you will waste it. And that is the real tragedy. You might ask, why must I suffer? Why can't life be easier? But that is the wrong question. A better question is, what is this suffering teaching me? What am I meant to learn? Because there is always something to learn. Maybe it's patience. Maybe it's resilience. Maybe it's the realization that you are not walking the right path, and the pain is what forces you to correct course. Whatever the case, you must look at suffering as a teacher, not as a punishment. And here is the real challenge: when you suffer, you must not only endure it, but you must use it. You must take your pain and transform it into something meaningful. You must allow it to forge you into someone capable of helping others, of standing firm in the face of chaos, of carrying a burden that others cannot. Your pain is not meaningless. It is preparing you for something greater, something you cannot yet see. If you trust that, if you refuse to give in to despair, you will come out the other side stronger, wiser, and more capable than before. Because pain is not the end, it is the beginning of transformation. There will come a point in your life, perhaps many points, where the burden is too much. The weight of suffering will press down on you so hard that you will think, I can't do this anymore. And at that moment you will face a critical choice. You can surrender. But surrender to what? That's the question. Because if you surrender to despair, if you allow yourself to believe that life is nothing but suffering, and that there is no meaning, no justice, no hope, then you will collapse. You will fall into resentment, self-destruction, and nihilism. And there is nothing good down that road. But there is another choice. Instead of surrendering to despair, you can surrender to God. That doesn't mean giving up responsibility. It doesn't mean passivity. It means acknowledging that you are not meant to carry everything alone. It means recognizing that there is an order beyond your comprehension, a wisdom greater than your own, and that trusting in that is not weakness, it is the only way forward. Despair is seductive. It tells you that you are justified in your bitterness, that the world is cruel, that no one cares. And if you believe that, truly believe it, then nothing matters. You stop striving. You stop hoping. You stop being willing to bear the necessary suffering of life. And once you go far enough down that road, it is almost impossible to turn back. Despair can consume you, and it will if you let it. Surrendering to God, on the other hand, is not easy. It requires something much harder than giving up. It requires trust. It requires you to stand in the middle of your suffering and say, I do not understand why this is happening, but I will not let it break me. I will place my faith in something higher than myself. I will move forward even though I cannot see the full path ahead. That is real courage. That is the choice that leads not to destruction, but to redemption. Look at the great figures of faith. They all suffered. They all faced moments where they could have fallen into despair. But instead, they surrendered to God. They said, not my will, but yours be done. And that did not mean their suffering disappeared. It meant their suffering had meaning. It meant they were given the strength to endure it, to transform it, to use it for something greater. If you are suffering, if you feel like you cannot go on, do not surrender to despair. That path leads nowhere but deeper into darkness. Instead, surrender to God. Trust that there is meaning even if you cannot yet see it. Trust that your suffering is not wasted. And then stand up. Carry your burden with faith, not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. And in doing so, you will find that you are not alone, that you are never alone. Because when you surrender to God, you do not collapse, you rise. Victory is not handed to you. It is not something that simply happens because you want it to. It is fought for, suffered for, and earned through struggle. And more than anything, true victory over despair, over suffering, over the chaos of life belongs to those who trust in God. Not because trusting in God makes life easy, not because it guarantees comfort or worldly success, but because trusting in God aligns you with something greater than yourself, something that gives your struggle meaning and your suffering purpose. Think about what happens when a person does not trust in God. They trust in themselves, or in the world, or in the fleeting promises of money, status, or pleasure. But those things are fragile. They can be taken away in an instant. And when they are, what remains? If your foundation is built on things that are temporary, then your life collapses the moment they are shaken, and life will shake you. That is inevitable. But trusting in God, truly trusting, means you are anchored to something unshakable. It means that no matter what storms come, no matter what trials arise, you do not fall apart. That doesn't mean you won't suffer. It doesn't mean you won't feel pain, but it means that pain will not destroy you, because you know, deep in your soul, that there is something beyond this suffering, that there is meaning even in the worst of circumstances. Look at history. Look at Scripture. Every great victory was achieved through faith, not just effort. David did not defeat Goliath because he was stronger. He won because he trusted in God. Moses did not lead his people out of slavery because he was powerful. He did it because he placed his faith in something higher than himself. And Christ did not conquer death through force. He did it through absolute trust in the will of the Father. Victory does not mean the absence of struggle. It does not mean everything goes your way. It means that through every hardship, every failure, every setback, you continue forward because you trust that God is leading you somewhere meaningful. It means that when life tries to break you, you refuse to be broken, not through sheer willpower alone, but through faith. And this is important. You must act as if that faith is real. Trusting in God is not passive. It is not just sitting back and waiting for Him to do everything for you. It is choosing to stand up when you feel like falling. It is choosing to move forward when everything in you wants to quit. It is choosing to do what is right, even when it is hard, because you believe that God rewards those who remain faithful. Victory belongs to those who trust in God, because trusting in God gives you the strength to endure suffering, the wisdom to navigate chaos, and the courage to keep going when everything seems hopeless. And if you do that, if you trust and act accordingly, you will find that in the end you have already won. So here you are, standing at the edge of everything you fear of suffering, of failure, of exhaustion, of uncertainty. And you have a choice. You can give in to despair, surrender to the weight of life, and let bitterness consume you. Or you can stand up, bear your burden, and move forward with faith. The world will test you. That is inevitable. You will be pushed to your limits, stripped of comfort, made to suffer in ways you never expected. But you must understand this is not pointless. This is the refining fire, the trial that reveals who you are and who you are meant to become. And if you hold fast, if you trust in God, even when everything else is collapsing, you will find that you are stronger than you ever imagined. Because you are not alone. Your pain is seen. Your struggle is known. And if you surrender not to despair, but to God, you will be given the strength to endure. More than that, you will be given purpose. You will come to understand that the suffering you bear is not a curse, but a calling. A calling to rise above, to transform, to become something greater than you are now. So when you feel like giving up, when the darkness presses in, when you are exhausted beyond belief, stand. Trust. Carry your cross, not because it is easy, but because it is necessary, because victory belongs to those who refuse to be broken. And if you trust in God, if you keep moving forward, if you refuse to let suffering make you bitter, then you will find something extraordinary on the other side. You will find yourself, you will find meaning. And you will find that in the struggle itself, God has been with you all along.